Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this Hope for the Future workshop. We are a climate charity working to equip people across the UK with the confidence and skills needed to engage with their elected representatives on climate issues. We believe that large-scale action is needed to address climate change. So we work across the country to connect people with powerful decision makers to help them work together to take decisive action on climate change. In our session today, we're going to be preparing for your meeting with your Member of Parliament. We're going to learn about who Members of Parliament are, what they do, and how we can work with them to effectively tackle climate change. Then we will prepare for your meeting with your MP, including planning the questions you'd like to ask them in the Q&A. Before we begin, I want you to think about the climate issue that's most important to you. It could be anything to do with climate change. Maybe green transport, climate education, or even global justice. Take some time to think of it, whatever it is, and then write it down on a sheet of paper and keep it safe. You have 2 minutes. You have 1 minute left. You have 10 seconds left. And your time is up. Keep your piece of paper close to hand because you're going to need it later on when we start thinking about questions for your MP. But first, let's learn a little bit more about who MPs are. This building is the Houses of Parliament in London, and it is home to the UK Parliament. Parliament is the country's lawmaking body. That means that all the laws we have in the UK are made in this building by the people who work there. There are 2 different rooms or chambers of Parliament. You might have seen them on television before if you've ever watched the news or Prime Minister's questions. The chamber in green is called the House of Commons, and the chamber in red is called the House of Lords. Each of these chambers are responsible for a different kind of decision-making. The House of Commons, the Green Chamber, is responsible for writing first drafts of laws, debating on these drafts, and then voting on whether or not they think these drafts should be officially passed into law or not. The people who work in this chamber are called Members of Parliament. The House of Lords, the Red Chamber, is responsible for looking at the draft laws that are sent to it by the House of Commons and scrutinising them. Their job is to see if they can find any problems or criticisms. If they don't find any problems, they will vote and approve the law and make it an official Act of Parliament. But if they do find problems, then they will amend the proposed law and send it back to the House of Commons to look at again. The people who work in this chamber are called peers. Another big difference between these 2 chambers is that the Members of Parliament in the House of Commons are democratically elected, and the peers in the House of Lords are not. Today, we're just going to focus on that first room, the House of Commons, We're going to learn about the members of parliament that sit there, who they are, what they do, and how they can help us act on climate change. Parliament does many different things, but the main thing we're going to focus on today is that Parliament is the place where the laws that affect the entire country get made. So, who are MPs? Members of Parliament are also called MPs. Anyone over the age of 18 can become an MP, but they have to be elected to the position. MPs are elected in general elections by everybody who is aged 18 or over and registered to vote. These general elections usually take place every 5 years. Some MPs that you might have heard of include Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, Priti Patel, Caroline Lucas, and Ed Miliband. In the UK, we have 650 MPs who each represent a particular area of the country. This area is the MP's constituency, and the people that live there are their constituents. The most important part of an MP's job is to represent the views of their constituents. It's their job to do this regardless of if their constituents even voted for them or not, or if their constituents are old enough to vote. This means that you will have an MP who represents your area and whose job it is to represent your beliefs. But before we learn more about that, we need to understand a bit more about what it is that an MP actually does. Typically, MPs will spend the first half of their week in the Houses of Parliament. This is where the laws for the UK get made. One of the main things that MPs will do in Parliament is debate bills and vote on whether or not they'll be passed into law. In these debates, MPs should represent the views of their constituents and take these views into account when they vote on the bills. As well as debating on bills, MPs can also write and propose their own bills to debate. These bills could be on a range of different issues, all the way from foreign policy to education policy. An MP will write and propose their own bill if they have strong opinions on an issue and a clear vision of a law that they want to see put into place to help address that issue. An MP might also write and propose a bill after talking to their constituents and hearing about the kinds of laws that their constituents would like to see put into effect. After spending the first half of their week in Parliament, MPs will usually spend the latter half of their week back in their constituency. While they're there, they will meet with their constituents to discuss any problems they may be facing. The MP will then work on helping their constituents overcome these problems. This kind of work is called casework. A common example of casework for an MP might involve a constituent asking their MP for support to get access to council housing. A constituent might go to their MP if they're having troubles getting through to the council, or if the council has declined to provide them with the housing that they are entitled to. In this instance, the MP could help out by lobbying the council on behalf of the constituent and talking directly to the relevant council cabinet ministers about their constituent's case to make sure they get the housing that they're entitled to. As well as asking for help with casework, constituents can also come to their MPs and ask for political support from them. They may do this if they want their MP to express support for a certain campaign, political platform, or policy. For example, a constituent might go to their MP and ask that they support a climate-conscious platform by opposing the opening of a new coal mine. Their MP might then help this constituent by agreeing to write to a government minister and oppose the coal mine, or to vote against it when the matter is debated in Parliament. To help us understand a bit more about what an MP's work looks like in practice, we've taken this timetable from the diary of a real MP. This shows what a typical week for an MP looks like. You might notice that the timetable is colour-coded. Parliamentary business is in blue, constituency matters are in green, and free time is in pink. Take a moment to have a look at the timetable. Now, working in pairs, write down 3 things that you notice about this timetable. You might want to think about things like what most of the MP's time is being spent on, how much free time they have, and the kinds of jobs they're doing. Most importantly, try to think about what this timetable tells you about what an MP's job is like. You have 10 minutes to answer these questions in your pairs. If you have time left over at the end, your teacher can facilitate a class discussion to see what everyone wrote. Your 10 minutes starts now. You have 5 minutes left. You have 2 minutes left. Time's up! Hopefully everyone has now had the chance to write down the 3 things that they noticed about this timetable, and to think about what this all tells us about what an MP's job is like. There are a few things I notice about this timetable that I'll share with you. The first thing is that MPs tend to work very long days. This MP is working from 8 AM to 8 PM almost every day. Another thing I notice is that MPs do a relatively even split between parliamentary and constituency work. There's around an equal amount of green and blue on this timetable, but there's not a lot of pink, which means there's not a lot of free time. A final important thing that I notice from this calendar is that MPs do lots of visits to constituency groups. On Friday at 1 PM, this MP had a visit to a local school booked in. This is worth bearing in mind, as this could be something you want to talk to your MP about. If you ask, they may be willing to come into your school and talk to you and your classmates about the issues you care about, including climate change. And on that note, now we know more about who MPs are and what they do, we can start to have a think about why it's so important that we do talk to them about climate change. One reason that this is really important is that talking to our MPs can be an important means of achieving change. Think about it like this. If you want to see positive action on climate change on a large scale, then that is likely going to involve the passing of lots of new laws. And if you want to see the kind of change that requires parliamentary action, like the passing of new laws, then you really need to be prepared to engage with Parliament in some way. Talking to your MP and lobbying them to help pass these laws is a really important way to help achieve that large-scale change that we need on the climate. Talking to our MPs about climate change also provides them with a mandate to act. This means that asking your MP to take action on a climate issue shows them that there's appetite for change. It also gives them a mandate. This is also known as the power to act. Because it's part of an MP's job to represent the changes their constituents want to see, talking to your MP about climate change gives them the power to start taking action on it on your behalf. These are just a couple of reasons why it's so important to get talking to our MPs about climate change.
So, let's say you want to get in touch with your MP to talk to them about climate change. How do you actually contact them? And once you have got hold of them, how do you make sure that you can both have a productive conversation? At Hope for the Future, we've developed a unique approach to engaging with MPs that's designed to help you have a positive conversation with your MP. We call our method the relationship-based approach. The relationship-based approach is a process you undertake before meeting or writing to your MP, and there are 3 steps to it: research, finding common ground, and creating an ask. Let's take a look at each step in a little more detail. Step 1 of the relationship-based approach is research. Ken Hamer says that designing a presentation without your audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. This doesn't mean that you should write a love letter to your MP. Instead, it means that you need to research your MP so that you can tailor your message when you speak to them and present what you're saying in a way that's easier for them to connect to. After all, when you talk to someone, it's always helpful to know who it is that you're actually talking to. TheyWorkForYou.com is a really useful website for finding out initial information about your MP. If you input your postcode into the homepage, then They Work For You will tell you who your MP is, as well as give you an overview of the different ways your MP has voted on a variety of issues, including climate issues. If you want to find out a more detailed record of what exactly your MP has said about climate issues in Parliament, then you can use Hansard. Hansard is a written record of all debates that occur in Parliament. So if you want to see what your MP has been saying in more detail, then you can go to hansard.parliament.uk and search for your MP's name and see if anything comes up in relation to climate issues. Having a look at your MP's social media and website is also a really helpful tool when you are researching them. If your MP is already supporting national campaigns or groups of constituents, then their social media is where they're most likely to be posting about it. Once you've done all of your research on your MP and have a better idea of who they are and the sorts of issues that they care about, then the next phase of this step of the relationship-based approach is to use your research to help work out where your MP falls on a 5-point scale. you should draw out the scale like this, where 1 stands for completely opposed, 2 is more against than 4, 3 is neutral, 4 is more for than against, and 5 is completely in favour. Once you've drawn out the scale, have a think about the specific issue that you want to talk to your MP about. Maybe in this case it's an issue to do with climate change. Most likely it's an issue that you yourself are a 5 on. It's something that you care deeply about. Bearing this issue in mind, take a look at the scale. Think back to all of the research that you've done and work out where your MP falls on this issue. Are they a 5 like you? Or maybe they're more neutral at a 3, or perhaps they're all the way down the other end at a 1 and are actually completely opposed to the issue. Wherever it is that you work out your MP falls on this scale, make sure to make a note of it. Once you've completed your research, you'll be ready to move on to step 2 of the relationship-based approach. This step is called finding common ground. There are a few reasons why it can be really beneficial to focus on identifying some common ground when you contact your MP. One reason is that having common ground with somebody helps you to communicate more constructively with them. If you and your MP both share a certain goal, interest, or point of view, then it's more likely that you're going to work well with one another. Another reason that common ground is important is that it can be a useful tool with which you can influence your MP. If you find out that you're a 5 on the scale and your MP is much lower down, then it may be tempting just to try and drag them higher up the scale by bombarding them. However, this is rarely an effective technique, as it can make people react very defensively and even dig their heels in and become less willing to change. But if you're able to identify points of common ground with your MP, then you can use these to help you coax them up the scale point by point. Venn diagrams are a great tool to plot your research onto once you've done it. Draw 2 overlapping circles and list all of your MP's interests that you found out about while you were researching them in one of the circles. Then, on the circle on the other side, list your interests. This can include the issue that you want to talk to your MP about, but may also include things like empowering your MP to take action and building up support in your community for tackling this issue. Then, once you have a set of interests on either side, look for any similarities or points of overlap and write these down in the central segment. Everything that ends up in this segment is the common ground that you share with your MP. However, if you find yourself in a situation where you're a 5 on a certain issue and your MP is a 1, then the idea of finding common ground this way may feel impossible. This is a completely understandable feeling. The good news is that even in a case like this, there may still be some way that you can identify common ground. In most cases, any MP is going to have an interest in being re-elected in the next general election. If there are no other points of overlap between you and your MP, then you can use this interest in re-election as your common ground. If you find that this is the case for you, then your Venn diagram might end up looking something more like this. Let's imagine that you want to see more green jobs available in your local area, but perhaps you learn from theyworkforyou.com that your MP has voted against issues surrounding green jobs, and you learn from Hansard that your MP has even spoken up in debates opposing green jobs. So they're definitely a 1 on the scale and completely opposed to this issue. But you do know that your MP will want to win votes in order to keep their position and be re-elected in the next general election. In this case, your common ground can be achieved if you can convince your MP that regional investment in green jobs will be a popular local policy and a vote winner, and therefore that it will help them out come election time. Once you've arrived at your common ground, you can use it to help you come up with an ask. Crafting an ask is the third step to the relationship-based approach. When you're thinking about what exactly it is that you want to ask your MP, it's really important to make sure that the ask that you make of them is SMART. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. This means that if you're asking your MP to take an action, you should always be specific about the action you want them to take, be able to easily measure if the action has been completed or not, ask for an achievable and realistic action, and lay out a time frame for your MP to complete the action within. The reason that it's so important for you to make your ask smart is that it helps you to stay on target when you're talking to your MP and make sure that you can get something out of your conversation. If they agree with your climate concerns, then that's a great thing to hear, but it's even better if something meaningful can be done about it. Bearing this in mind, there are some things you can ask your MP that will be helpful to address the climate issues you care about and will be realistic and achievable for your MP to accomplish. You could ask your MP to pass along your letter to the government minister that is responsible for working on the issue you are contacting them about. You could ask your MP to submit a written question. This would involve your MP submitting a question to a government minister to find out more detailed information about their work or to request that they take a certain action. Talking to the media is another good ask to make of your MP. You can ask them to write articles, blog posts, or do interviews with the media to discuss and promote the climate issue or campaign that you've brought to their attention. You could also ask them to work on addressing the issue in conjunction with authorities like the local council. This might be the sort of thing you'd like to ask them if you're interested in enacting changes that are specific to your local area. You could also ask your MP to propose an adjournment or Westminster Hall debate. You could ask them this if you want to see the issue that you wrote to them about discussed more broadly by a variety of different MPs acknowledging and weighing in on the issue. When you're thinking about all the different options of what to ask your MP, remember that it's really important that you tailor what you're asking to your MP. For an MP that's lower down on the 5-point scale, we recommend making simpler asks. But if your research has indicated that your MP is higher up on the 5-point scale, then you might want to consider something a bit more involved. Once you've done your research, found some points of common ground, and crafted your smart ask for your MP, then you've completed the 3 steps of the relationship-based approach to contacting your MP. This means that you're now ready to take the final step and actually reach out to your MP.
Now that we know what the relationship-based approach is, we can work together to put it into practice as we prepare for your meeting with your MP. That means we need to start by researching the MP you'll be meeting. Louise Hay is a Labour MP and her constituency is Sheffield Heeley. She grew up in Sheffield around Abbeydale Road and then went on to study at Nottingham University, and she first became an MP in 2015. Louise is currently the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport. This means that on top of her regular responsibilities as an MP, she is also responsible for influencing the Labour Party's stance on transport issues. She also scrutinises the government's approach to transport and regularly asks questions of the Transport Secretary in Parliament. In the UK, transport contributes more to climate change than any other sector. This is mainly due to the number of petrol and diesel cars on the road. One key way to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions is to provide people with alternatives to travelling by car. This isn't just good for tackling climate change, but reducing pollution is also good for everyone's health as well. In cities like Sheffield, buses are a climate-friendly alternative to cars for short journeys within the city and to neighbouring towns like Barnsley, Doncaster and Rotherham. While petrol and diesel buses do emit greenhouse gases, many more people can travel on one bus than in one car, meaning that a well-used bus service can bring the number of polluting vehicles way down. The image on the slide shows what this looks like in practice. However, earlier this year, it was discovered that the government had withdrawn almost half of the funding they had initially promised for upgrading the country's bus services. This means that there's going to be less money to run buses in new routes, less money to reduce bus fares, and less money to buy electric buses that are better for the climate and for people's health. But on her website, Louise Hay has spoken in support of funding public transport and for making buses emissions-free. She said that our communities need a reliable, cheap and environmentally friendly bus service. This might be something you'd like to ask her more about when you meet, as transport issues have a big impact on our climate and environment. The website theyworkforyou.com shows that Louise generally has a good track record for how she's voted on climate change issues in Parliament. She's voted against allowing fracking and has voted in favour of plans to eliminate the majority of transport emissions by 2030. However, Louise doesn't always attend votes and debates about climate issues, and most of her voting record in this area seems to be based more on the beliefs of the Labour Party rather than her own passionately held beliefs. This means that she doesn't always take her own initiative to act on climate issues. So there are still some more steps she could be taking to help proactively address climate change. Bearing all of this research about Louise in mind, where do you think she falls on the 5-point scale? Is she completely in favour of taking action on climate change? Is she completely opposed? Or is she somewhere in the middle? Take 5 minutes to talk about this as a class and share your point of view. Your time starts now. You have 1 minute left. And your time's up. What number on the scale did you think matched Louise? I think I would put her at around a 3 or a 4. Now that we've done some research and you've got an idea of where your MP falls on the 5-point scale, we can move on to step 2 of the relationship-based approach. This step is finding common ground. In front of you, there should be a Venn diagram that looks something like this. All the things written on the left-hand circle are your MP's interests. The right-hand circle is for you to write all of your interests in. These can be climate issues that you're interested in, but they can also be other social and political issues too, such as education, voting age, or whatever is most important to you. The middle segment is to record any areas where yours and your MP's interests might overlap. Remember that you can always use your MP's interest in re-election as common ground if you can't notice anything else. For the next 15 minutes, work in your pairs to fill out this Venn diagram. Start with writing down your interests and then move on to writing down common ground between yourself and the MP. If you can, try to work with the same person you were paired up with before. You have 15 minutes and your time starts now. Now that we've completed steps 1 and 2 of the relationship-based approach, we're going to finish by focusing on step 3, crafting questions to ask the MP at the Q&A. We're going to use the research that we've done and the common ground that we found to help us write these questions. The QR code and the URL on the screen both link to an online form with categories for the different kinds of questions you might want to ask your MP. Working individually, go through the form and try to think of at least one question to fit each category. If you're feeling stuck for things to ask, then have a look at the 2 suggested smart asks on the form and pick which one you would most like to ask Louise. And if you still need inspiration, you can also get question ideas from the common ground areas of your own Venn diagrams. It's always a good idea to start a conversation with your MP with a question about something that both you and the MP are interested in. So if in doubt, start there. Good luck with your question writing. You have about 30 minutes and your time starts now. You're halfway through your time. You might want to start thinking about moving on to looking at the middle section of your Venn diagram soon. You have 2 minutes left. And your time is up. Now that we've completed steps 1 and 2 of the relationship-based approach, we're going to finish by focusing on step 3, crafting questions to ask the MP at the Q&A. We're going to use the research that we've done and the common ground that we found to help us write these questions. The QR code and the URL on the screen both link to an online form with categories for the different kinds of questions you might want to ask your MP. Working individually, go through the form and try to think of at least one question to fit each category. If you're feeling stuck for things to ask, then have a look at the 2 suggested smart asks on the form and pick which one you would most like to ask Louise. And if you still need inspiration, you can also get question ideas from the common ground areas of your own Venn diagrams. It's always a good idea to start a conversation with your MP with a question about something that both you and the MP are interested in. So if in doubt, start there. Good luck with your question writing. You have about 30 minutes and your time starts now. You're halfway through your question writing time. You have 5 minutes left. Now is a good time to start thinking about finishing off your questions and submitting them. And your time is up. Please remember to put your name on your online form and to click the Submit button. So, hopefully everyone has now had the chance to write and submit their questions for the Q&A with your MP. Make sure you've included your name and your school on your form before you send it off. On Thursday, we'll be meeting with Louise Hay MP, and she'll be answering a selection of the questions you've written for her today. Thank you so much for participating in this Hope for the Future workshop, and I look forward to seeing you all at the Q&A.